Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webcast. My name is Christine Dorsey Davis. I'm the Executive Director of the Ohio chapter of APA and Chair of the Urbanism Division, and I'm your webcast moderator. Today is Friday, April 27th, and we will be hearing the presentation, Design Diversity Index, Building a Data Feedback Loop. And I apologize if I stop talking all of a sudden, because I have a terrible tickle in my throat that just won't seem to go away. For technical help during today's webcast, you can type your questions in the chat box found in the webcast toolbar to the right of your screen, or you can call that 1-800 number shown in bold. And for your content questions related to the presentation, you can type those in the questions box, again, located in the webinar toolbar to the right of your screen. We'll answer those at the end of the presentation during the Q&A. Coming up on your screen is a list of our sponsoring chapters and divisions, and we actually just received a few more in the last week, which we'll be getting up on our website and on this screen the next time you join us. But if you are scrolling down the list and you don't see your chapter or division listed, go ahead, reach out to them and say, hey, why don't you join the Planning Webcast series? Today's webcast is sponsored by the Ohio chapter of APA. To learn more about them, just visit ohioplanning.org. And to learn about all the chapters and divisions, just head over to planning.org/divisions or /chapters. On your screen is a list of our upcoming webcasts. We have quite a few. You can learn more about these by visiting our webcast webpage at ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. And to log your CM credits for attending today's webcast, head over to planning.org and log in your MyAPA account. And then from there, you can search for CM activities, either by the title of today's webcast or the event number, both of which can be found on our webcast webpage, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. This webcast has been approved for 1.5 CM credits for live viewing only. We do have some recorded webcasts available for distance education credit, and you can check those out again on our webcast webpage, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. Hey, like us on Facebook, Planning Webcast Series, to receive up-to-date information on our sessions. And we are recording today's webcast. We'll be available on our YouTube channel. Just head over there and search Planning Webcast and we'll pop up. Or you can download a PDF of the presentation again after the conclusion of today's session on our webcast webpage, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. Okay, let's get started with that. I'm going to turn it over to David, our first presenter today. Great.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is David Zherka, and I'm the Associate Director at Kent State University's Cleveland Urban Design Collaborative. And joining me today is Jacinda Walker.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jacinda Walker. I am the founder and creative director of an organization named Design Explore.
And today we're planning to present initial framework and next steps for the Design Diversity Index. So we'll cover what the index is here in a minute. The agenda for today will include a little background on the Design Diversity Initiative in general, which the index is one project. The various project phases for the index. We'll talk a bit about the data collection process, how we select the criteria we use to select the universities and the disciplines involved in the index, and then a relatively brief overview of the data collected thus far and how we are visualizing the data, then next steps. And after that, we're particularly interested in hearing your questions, comments, and feedback as the project is still in progress. And it's at the point in time where comments, feedback, and any general insights from those in attendance could be really helpful to the work. Okay, so a bit on the Design Diversity Project overall. It's an initiative birthed out of the Kent State Cleveland Urban Design Collaborative in 2013. The initiative's goal is to foster learning, influence growth, and promote people of color in the design professions in Ohio. We'll define specifically which professions we're looking at right now in a subsequent slide. But our intention is to educate communities, specifically youth, about the range of design careers available, connect professionals across disciplines to grow the design community in a multidisciplinary way, and then also celebrate the accomplishments of people of color in the design professions. We undertake a number of events and public outreach activities and some programs that are a part of design diversity. Again, the Index project is just one of those. The Design Diversity Initiative is led by an advisory committee comprised of individuals in mostly Northeast Ohio, since that's where we're based right now. And we have a few individuals on there that represent different design disciplines, including architecture, planning, urban design, landscape architecture, and graphic design. But we are also interested in expanding the representation and the individuals that are on the committee. So if you happen to be in Northeast Ohio and you're interested in being part of the larger work of design diversity, please get in touch. Now about the index. What is it? So Design Diversity Index, it's a multidisciplinary tool for measuring progress towards achieving diversity goals of those various disciplines. The goals themselves, we expect will be defined by the the respective disciplines. So we aren't at this point laying out what those diversity goals are. We're focused more on the first step of collecting the data, getting a baseline, in other words, of the number of African Americans and Latinos in the design disciplines, which then can serve as a tool for developing programs and tracking progress across these various disciplines. The tool itself will live online as an easily accessible resource, where we are in the in the process right now of collecting the data, but over time we expect that the data will continue to be maintained and then visualized maybe annually, or in some cases every couple of years, depending on the data source, to give people a snapshot, an easy to consume kind of glimpse of the current state of diversity numbers in the design professions. We're currently focused on, for the sake of scale and just kind of rolling out the project, the first phase is the northern third of Ohio, but our intention is to roll out throughout Ohio, throughout the rest of the state, and ultimately serve as a model that could be duplicated in other states across the country. We'd also like to thank our funder for the project, the George Gunn Foundation, for supporting this first phase of the work. The research team for the index is comprised of 4 individuals primarily, including Terry Schwartz, the director of the Kent State Cleveland Urban Design Collaborative, myself, Jacinda Walker, our design researcher and founder of Design Explorer, and then Velvet Delaney, our assistant researcher. So the project is broken up into 3 phases, and I'm going to hand it off to Jacinda right now to explain the project.
Excellent, excellent. The project, as Dave indicated, is broken up into 3 phases of work. The first phase is investigate. This is basically where we've been reading, absorbing, finding reports, researching things online, researching things in libraries, and basically gathering all that stuff. The second phase is visualizing, and this is really where we begin to visually design and construct the infographics and relay the data so that people who are who have seen it, they're able to visually understand it. And then last phase is going to be disseminating, where we take those pieces of information. We're hopeful to create a report at the end, as well as some other materials that will be on the website, and get those out into the public, and possibly even have more conversations locally as to next steps and other things along that line. The investigation phase has specific criteria that we're looking at here. This is where we selected the criteria for creating school groupings. We selected organizations to reference so that we would be able to gather data, gather reports, look at the research that they may have already done on this topic as well. We've created multiple mappings of the different counties in the state of Ohio to look at where we're going to be researching at, and then also creating a calendar for researching and collecting the school groupings, and then lastly, inventorying and compiling all of the previously collected data as well. During phase 2, the visualizing phases is where we look at hiring a website consultant to help us with the Design Diversity Index dashboard, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that as we move forward. We're also going to be creating drafts of the actual report that will come out during the disseminate phase. We're going to be sharing the website drafts and things along those lines with our partners, and looking for usability, also looking for feedback. That's kind of where we're hopeful that many of the attendees during today's call will have a chance to share with us their thoughts and insights. And then lastly, we will upload the report to an online platform so that people can kind of download it, as well as having a few print copies floating around the area also. In the dissemination phase, what we're going to be doing is collecting all of the research components. These are the PDF files, these are the online data reports, these are websites that are hosting the particular data who may not have printed copies of that. We're also going to present copies of the printed document to other organizations, as well as our partners, as well as the professional organizations who've also helped us gather this. And then last but never least, we're going to share the website. We'll roll that out. We'll begin to track usage and update that and coordinate how those updates will be happening. Now, during the data collection phase, which is where we are leaving from, we're about to move into visualization. We're kind of straddling these two right now. But the primary things that have happened during the data collection phase is that we've looked at this into 3 particular streams. The first stream looks at the who we know, next, the access we have, and then lastly, what we know. And this is a visualization to kind of describe and kind of help everyone to see how we've broken down this first phase of the project. In who we know, we're looking at people who are on our advisory and the industry professional organizations that they are affiliated with and can access information from. And so here we list out several of them. American Institute of Architects, National Organization of Minority Architects, American Society of Landscape Architects, American Planning Association, Black Interior Design Network, International Interior Design Association, Industrial Designers Society of America, and the Professional Association of Design, AIGA. Within these professional networks, we're also looking at professional and social networks, as well as industry leaders.
So some of the professions that we're looking at were just listed, which include architecture, landscape architecture, interior design, graphic design, industrial design, and planning. So within each of these categories, there's a professional association that tracks and tracks some membership and disseminates information to those members. So some of the initial data that we gathered and we're currently reviewing within these disciplines are kind of listed here. So this is just a kind of brief overview of some of the key insights collected thus far. So for architecture, it's the American Institute of Architects. And for Ohio, we have data on architects and the demographic information associated with those architects, but that's not necessarily the case with all of the disciplines, as you'll see. So in Ohio, we have 2,650 architects. Only 63 of those are African American, and actually about half of those, about 26 to 28, are in the greater Cleveland area, as provided through data and the University of Cincinnati's website that tracks, it's self-reported data on architects that's available at the link shown on the screen. So that's 2.3% of the architects in the state of Ohio that are African American, and then by comparison, 14.2% of Ohioans are African American. So those are the kind of comparisons that we're looking at through the report. What are the numbers, the percentages of African Americans or Latino community members in the state of Ohio, but also within break that down into various cities, and then use that as a benchmark to compare. At this point, the question comes up, well, then what is the goal? Is the goal to have 14.2% of architects to be African American? And that's a question that's kind of open. And again, the intention of this project is to provide the data that then can be used by individual professional organizations or academic programs, as we'll get into, to define their own goals. And again, this is a resource to help in that effort. Another point within AIA is the need to obtain additional Latino or Latina data by city, which again, the city data is available for African American community members, but we want to look at both communities throughout our work. Next, for landscape architecture, the ASLA, we've been in contact with representatives from the Ohio chapter, and a few key points kind of overall are that in 2013, ASLA organized its first diversity summit, and ever since, now through 2017 is the most recent report that's available on the website. It identifies key steps in their progress towards increasing diversity of the discipline. And it's clearly noted that the percentage of landscape architects that are African American or Latino don't align with the general demographic numbers in those communities, but specific data isn't currently available on demographics. ASLA does collect, the geographic location of licensed landscape architects is available in Ohio, but not associated with their demographics, as we've found thus far. So this is something that we intend to work on going forward, and in collaboration with ASLA to obtain, again, what is available, and then what are gaps that might be provided in the future. Next, in urban planning and APA, probably most relevant to the attendees of today's webinar. APA Ohio doesn't currently have demographic information collected on membership, but it does have, of course, the number and geographic location of all members. So in recent conversations, there may be a process put in place soon to collect this data and get a better sense of not only race and ethnicity data, but also gender within the profession. For interior design, in 2016, IIDA hosted an annual industry roundtable that focused on diversity. And although the current data isn't available on African American and Latino practitioners in interior design, we do have information on gender, and 69% of practitioners in interior design are women, but female firm leadership is only 25%. So although this isn't a race or ethnicity data point. It is related to this question of diversity, and it may be a sign of what we may expect based on anecdotal information and comments included in the reports and in conversations with leaders, maybe a situation that applies also to race and ethnicity. And then the last two professions that we're focused on are industrial design and AIGA, the Professional Association of All Design, in its rebranding. So in industrial design, we've had conversations with representatives at the local level, different chapters that Jacinda is focused on. So I think she'll take it from here.
Absolutely. Looking at the data from AIA and the other landscape organizations that David spoke of previously, is really important to understand that these two professional associations are certified. So a lot of that data is created and produced and measured yearly. However, with these last two organizations, IDSA and AIGA, they are just now really embarking on this with published and attainable data from their websites or printed materials that may go specifically to members and so forth. So with IDSA here in the Ohio area, I've been told that our local chapter here is not super active. There is one here. It hasn't been as big on our networking scene lately. However, our student chapter is incredibly active and incredibly diverse. It's actually housed at Cleveland Institute of the Art, and the faculty advisor is Carla Blackman. She's actually been the advisor for the student chapter for more than 10 years now. What's really interesting about the happenings at IDSA and how they're related to AIGA is that some members of IDSA are also members of AIGA, and there are some members of AIGA who are also members of IDSA, we found. When we start going through each of the organizations and we start finding out what types of things have they collected and produced to be able to document more of the demographic data that's happening within their membership organizations, we have to really look heavily at what AIGA has done with their design census. They've produced this for the last 2 years. The design census basically happens in November and December. There's about a 4 to 6 week window. We ask design professionals to apply and to sign up and give us data and tell us about yourself. The design census collects information on demographics, industry, design profession, compensation, satisfaction in the industry. It also looks at sexual orientation. Right now, the numbers from the design census are indicating that the design industry or the participants, as a matter of fact, they have on their website that 13,000 individuals participated in this year's census. You can actually log on to designcensus.org to really learn more about this and see that. The data is open source, and so it's raw, and you can kind of dive through this website and to read more and absorb more. Some of the things that they're reporting right now under the demographics pieces of the design census when we look at ethnicity is that the organization, or the 13,000 members who participated in the design census are white, 60% fell under that category, 10% fell under Asian, 11.3% fell under multi or biracial, 3.4% fell under African American, and 8.1% fell under Latino or Hispanic. This is really, really important to understand because here in the state of Ohio, we have 4 AIGA chapters here. Each of the AIGA chapters here has a little more than 200 members, which means that of the 25,000 members that are in AIGA nationally, a good 1,000 of them sit here in the state of Ohio. So it kind of really makes Ohio a hot spot for design and for AIGA. I also want to share that of the 4 AIGA nationally, we have about 163 student chapters, and then each of the 4 AIGA chapters here in Ohio have student chapters attached to them.
So as we look at, what are the outcomes or the mode of visualizing or presenting the work that we're the data that we're collecting, we have several examples to look at, and one of those in particular that we'd like to highlight is the report from the JMAX Bond Center on inclusion in architecture. And in this report, the intention was to look at one profession, namely architecture, across the entire geography of the United States to identify the locations where African Americans and Latino and Hispanic practitioners are located. So if you look up, we have the link, I believe, that was mentioned in the presentation to find the PDF online. You can find a series of really clear infographics that show the relative proportion of practitioners of color in different cities across the country, like the infographic shown here. So our objective is to create visualizations of the data similar in nature to this sort of presentation, but the key distinction in the work that we're doing and other examples that we found thus far is that our intention is to look at multiple design disciplines within a single geography rather than a single discipline within multiple geographies. We feel like both are really valuable sources of insights to advance design diversity goals, but the comparison between disciplines in a single geography like Cleveland, like Columbus, like Cincinnati may offer insights that we wouldn't catch or see if we just looked at one profession across the entire country. In other words, lessons from New York or lessons from Washington, D.C., where the percentage of architects is relatively high, may not easily transfer to places like Cleveland, where, for example, we don't have a relatively high number of government agencies where many of the architects in Washington, D.C. work, for example. But we may discover insights from graphic designers working in Cleveland and activities or strategies that they've deployed, which folks in the architecture community could learn from. So ultimately, that's our objective, is to provide a cross-cutting tool that helps transfer insights and transfer success projects from one discipline to another. And here's another example of the kinds of data and visualizations that are available in the Inclusion in Architecture report, which clearly communicate some of the data that can be quite overwhelming when an individual pulls it up in its raw format or in other formats that are available online currently.
Now, under the access we have, this is our second area of data collection, and here we're looking at the things that the people in our network actually have access to. And so the following reports we've actually obtained a ton of great information from, which is the Higher Education Arts Data Summary. There are about 300 schools that participate in this. There's also the National Association of School and of Art and Design, the NASAD, a lot of people refer to it as that. The National Center for Education Statistics, the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, and there are also online data resources that don't have published data like our Census Bureau, but they do report the data online, and it's digitally available to pick up. And then, of course, there's always amazing resources at public libraries. We're very fortunate here to have an amazing library system, and they've been very helpful on this particular project. Now, when we look at the schools, the data sets that we're primarily looking for, the name of the school, the address, of course, website, how easy is it to find information there? What type of institution? Is it a 4-year or is it a 2-year? What are the costs for attending? What's the campus setting look like? Does it offer on-campus or off-campus housing? And do we have contacts there that we can obtain this information from? And then we're also looking at the degree criteria, which talks about the design disciplines that are offered, what degree might be there, what kind of undergraduate and graduate programs there are available, what is the diverse student count, the faculty count, and so forth. Now, under what we know, we're looking at the groups that have knowledge and insights of the committee. And the organizations here that are listed here, the National Center for Education Statistics, Ohio Department of Higher Education, the Ohio Department of Education Diversity Report, the Directory of African American Architects, Inclusion in the Architecture Report that David just spoke of, the Design and Diversity Report from IIDA, as well as the ASLA Diversity Super Summit Report in 2017. We also used the framework from Design Journeys, Strategies for Increasing Diversity in Design Disciplines, as well as public libraries. Now, when we look at the data collected from the Design Journeys framework, from Design Journeys thesis, we rely heavily on the Design Journey Map. The Design Journey Map is a framework. It's a visual representation developed to map the distance a designer travels throughout the career. This type of journey map would help show what the journey looks like and where we could possibly place intervention along the way. It contains 4 color-coded bins referred to as passages. Foundations is in blue, proficiency is in violet, workforce is in green, and influence is in red. The gray triangles illustrate the gaps where transitional stops or leaks, this is kind of where we lose people, as they say, through the pipeline, that occur for a designer that's on the journey to become a designer. Then there are also career competency components attached in the first 3 passages of the journey to help cultivate the soft skills together with the hard skills that you've learned along the way. The other really great thing in the Design Journeys research project are these design principles. These are the design principles that are utilized to show what a solution might look like to close the gap in design. The first principle is comprehensive. This is basically meaning that we're going to have to meet multiple passages. The second one is collaborative. This means that AIGA and AIA might have to work together. This means that AIGA may have to work with parents, and parents may have to work with employers to be able to help understand. Their third principle is local. The solution should be able to go directly to where the youth is so that they can access it easy, so that they will be able to continue to use it and add that to their knowledge base. And then last but not least, which is where we're seeing a lot of challenges, is scholastic. It's principle number 4. Here in the state of Ohio, if you don't pass all of your parts of English, you may not graduate. If you don't pass geometry, you may not graduate. So these types of things, these types of scholastic academic issues within our school system here also play a role in looking at the lack of diversity in design disciplines. Now, the selection criteria that we're looking at to identify schools, right? What are we specifically looking at? Ohio is a very, very, very large state with many, many schools. We have over 250 educational institutions, and about another 125 of those offer one of the 6 disciplines of design that we're also looking at. So, of course, the first school selection criteria is design discipline. The design discipline is identified in academia as another brand or another branch of knowledge. So there are actually 6 design disciplines we're looking at with the Design Diversity Index. And those disciplines are as follows: architecture, landscape architecture, graphic design, industrial design, interior design, and urban design. Our second school selection criteria is location. Due to the funding of the project and the bandwidth of the research team, we chose to take the state of Ohio and kind of divide it in thirds, so to speak. And in group 1, which is where we are resting heavily on right now, it's in the Northeast Ohio, and some of those counties include Williams, Defiance, Paulding, Fulton, Henry, Lucas, Hancock, Ottaway, Sandusky, Medina, Wayne, and so forth. There are about 31 total here. Group 2 will be indicated in orange, and group 3 will be indicated in blue. And then the last selection criteria that we're looking at is degree. This is another very critical component because terminal degrees are what help individuals move to the next level easier. Terminal degrees is a university degree in the United States that is the highest on the academic track or the highest on the professional track in a given study. And here we've listed some of the terminal degrees that we're actually looking at. Associate degrees, bachelor's degrees, we're looking at master's degrees. We're also looking at information in architecture. We're also looking at urban planning and degrees along this line. Now, as we begin to have these 3 selection criteria, this is when we really were able to take the data that we had read and researched and found and looked at through reports and really begin to break it down to see what's here in the state of Ohio. Because as we look at the lack of diversity in design, many of the numbers that have been shown and displayed previously are all national numbers. But to really be able to fight this problem, we have to be able to be on the ground and do that work locally. And so this project will show what's happening here for the state of Ohio, looking at the lack of diversity in design. Group 1 schools are Bowling Green State University, Cleveland State University, Kent State University, University of Akron, University of Toledo, and Youngstown State University. We spent a lot of time looking at these 6 schools because they meet all of the selection criteria. They have multiple design disciplines. They are all in Northeast Ohio area within the 31 counties that we're looking at. They offer undergraduate and or graduate degrees at many of the schools. They also have tracks available with minors that allow students to be able to experiment and try different disciplines in the same institution. Group 1, Section B, those are our public and community colleges. Those are as follows: Cuyahoga Community College, Lakeland Community College, Lorain County Community College, North Central State College, Stark State College, Terra Community College, Northwest State Community College, Eastern Gateway Community College. These schools are also located in the same land base, the 31 counties. However, they are a little more spread out and a little more, there are more of them and they're more spread out. The unique thing about our community colleges here is that Ohio is a land grant school, and we're also a heavy manufacturing state here. And then lastly, Group 1, Section C, these are our private and for-profit institutions. And these institutions that we're going to be looking at are as follows: Ashland University, Baldwin Wallace University, Bluffington University, Cleveland Institute of Art, Defiance College, Malone University, Notre Dame College, University of Findlay, Ursuline College, and Walsh College. And here's a visualization of what all of the schools together look like with the counties. And so we're already seeing some unique things here. We're noticing that where there's lots of industry, we have a lot of schools in those areas. We're noticing where there's a lot of healthcare, we're seeing a lot there. Automotive industry, manufacturing plants, we notice that there are a lot of schools community colleges and clusters in these areas as well. Now, when we visualize, as we took all of that data and we began to visualize it, what we really started doing was wireframing different options on how we could display the data, as well as looking at how our user will be able to receive the data. And so the following are going to be some of the wireframing options that the index research team is considering. So wireframe option A would be looking at taking the data, making the aggregated website currently connected to designdiversity.org, meaning that there may be a feature on the homepage that kind of shows where the index is. And this could look really good in a 3-column or a 4-column grid. This graphic kind of shows what would happen as a user was moving through the website. What might they see? And these fair blue areas, excuse me, kind of represent what the project would look like. We're showing an example here of how a person might look up the professional associations that are in the organization. And what might they see? So here you see we're looking at maybe having some sort of tabbing system, so that a user would be able to kind of move through them, as well as knowing what's available. And in section B, you could also maybe look at this information by location, and that will be a chart displayed similar to the ones we've shown you previously. For wireframe option B, this option indicates that under the index tab, we would place this aggregated website like on maybe a microsite, because with all of the data, with all of the updating, with all of the infographic that could be there, this might maybe max out some of the space that's available on the current Design Diversity website. And it too can be shown in some sort of 3 or 4 column grid. For wireframe option 2, the example that we kind of wanted people to kind of maybe take a peek at is if we looked at this data by location, like if we wanted to say, hey, what kind of diversity is in this Northeast Ohio area, these 31 counties that we spoke about, what might it look like? How much is there? What's available? And that's kind of what this wireframe is showing the beginnings of. And here's what some of the data from this early first round really looks like. So of our 6 university schools that we're looking at, CSU is coming in so far with the most diversity at 22%. Now, the Design Diversity Project is primarily looking at African American and Latino. So Native American, other indigenous populations, Asian, we're not really focused on those. Those data sets were much, much smaller. And so to really be able to target these 2 populations, we've pulled that data forward, and you can kind of see that here. You can also take a peek and notice that the University of Akron and Bowling Green State University, they are tied for 4th place. And the third next up would be the University of Toledo, and then Youngstown State University. And last on our list is Kent State University, coming in at 11%. And that data is actually from the diversity reports with the Department of Education here in the state of Ohio. So you can kind of log on and see a lot of that data there. And we're looking forward to the updates so that as we produce the aggregated website, we'll make sure that that first round is the most current of documents from each of the organizations.
Mm-hmm. So as Jacinda mentioned, the intention for the project is to assemble, to integrate, to compare existing data, first by identifying what data is currently available and indicating where the gaps are, and then using the data that is available to create visualizations that provide kind of side-by-side comparisons between professions and between universities and between the programs within those universities, so that we can identify, and by we, I mean design professionals, design organizations, students that are interested in the professions, so that we can identify, hey, has there been a significant uptick or a change or a positive transformation in one of these disciplines? And if so, what happened? How did it happen? And is there any transferability in that approach that another discipline can take on and kind of initiate? So throughout our work for the past several years, that's an action that we identified as potentially useful. The opportunity to track year to year the change over time towards achieving these goals. So some of our next steps in terms of this work are to, one, of course, incorporate the feedback from today's webinar. So again, the comments that I hope you have and questions that you may have, we'd like to use them to incorporate into our process now moving forward. And then specifically, we intend to select a web developer or infographics designer to collaborate with us. As you see, Jacinda is a talented graphic designer, but time is limited.
Yes.
So we're looking for an individual to be part of our team, to work with us to take the data that we have assembled, which of course we didn't just present the spreadsheets in the spreadsheet format. We do find a kind of need to be intentional about curating the story or the narratives of some of the infographics that we present before we put them out on the website. So that's an important kind of collaboration question for the person that we work with. And then next, the information that we have assembled, including the infographics, will be incorporated into a draft report. Again, identifying what data is currently available among academic and professional organizations, where are the gaps as we identify them, what have we heard as maybe upcoming steps within those disciplines to collect the data if it's not currently available. Then we'll incorporate that information and post it on the index, and we consider that would be the launch of the index. Currently on designdiversity.org, we have a page for the index, which basically has information on the project and the intention and goals of the work, but that would be one of the locations for, one of the options for the index, a place for it to live. Then based on some of the initial feedback and user feedback we receive via the website, we'll publish the report. And that's something that we will have in print copies and available for download online. Then our intention is to learn from this first process, again, an initial phase of the work in the northern third of Ohio, then expanding to the mid and lower third of the state, so that we can eventually create a statewide resource where users can click on sections of the state that they're most interested in, or compare across the entire state to see, how the different disciplines are making changes. And then, as we showed in the 4-step or 4-phase design journey graphic, right now we're kind of targeted in that college phase 2 section of the journey, and profession, people that are kind of immediately out of school and early to later in their careers. But there's the previous step, or kind of upstream part of the journey, which is youth, students in elementary school or high school that are considering various design professions. We intend to expand into that age group with youth programs, so that would be available on the index as well. And then also later in the design journey, so tracking not only individuals in the profession, but individuals that are in positions of leadership within the profession, so business owners and design principals within the professions, because we find that mentorship and kind of feedback to give one's time back into the profession is also important, and we can't simply focus in on that middle section of college and early to mid-career. So we've started looking at Group 2, although that's not the place where we've spent the bulk of our time, but some interesting findings already from that midsection, including Columbus, is Wright State University is not listed in the National Center for Education Statistics. Next, a few design degrees are hidden, are not so obvious in departments. As we've shown before, we've identified the terminal degrees that we're using to track data within academic programs. But for example, CCAD has a master's design in integrative design, and that may be a design degree that we would have missed otherwise, but we recognize that we need to be really careful about identifying the degrees that trigger our interest. And then lastly, there's no PhD in design degrees offered in the state of Ohio yet, as far as we can tell. So if that's not the case, maybe that's something you can let us know. And then, as mentioned, we want to investigate earlier programs before college as well. So starting to map out what are the youth programs and how do we categorize those and how might they be visualized on the index. So we're starting to pull data from nationally funded programs, community-based youth programs, enrichment programs, maybe after-school programs, and college and career readiness as well. So I think ultimately the kind of flow from early education programs through to college, then to the design professions, and then later in career, ultimately this index could provide, you know, the baseline and ongoing metrics that are updated to track progress towards all of our design diversity goals.
We really hope that you've enjoyed the webinar for today. We really ask that you stay in touch with us and learn more about this particular project. David and I, we've listed our contact information here where you can find us at. We're not hard to catch up with. We're really easy to find. And you can always log on to designdiversity.org under contact and send something directly to David or send something directly to myself. And you can find me at jacinda@designexplorer.com, and you can find David at
David Jerka.
Yes.
Right now. So again, when the index launches, which it hasn't launched yet, obviously, if you want to be one of the first to find out when it does go live, the best way to do that is to just subscribe to the newsletter at designdiversity.org/contact, and we'll send out the information there. But in advance of that, which again, we expect that to happen in our timeline is in about the next month, in the end of May. So in that window between now and then, if you have questions, comments beyond the Q&A starting in right now, if you have questions or comments or additional information or resources that you can provide to help support the work, please reach out to us so that, again, we can incorporate it, because we still have a lot of work to do, and there's an opportunity to guide or influence that project before it's done.
Excellent.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, folks, so questions, if you
we're going to open it up for questions. I'm not sure. APA, are you here so that we can kind of see? And
can you hear me? Yeah, so let's go ahead and get some questions going. Let's see. The first one is, and I know you talked about this briefly, but could you please give a little more explanation as to why Native Americans and Asians are not included in the study?
Absolutely. This was really, that's a wonderful question. Thank you for asking. The challenge lies in the fact that many of the research and many of the reports that we gathered here in the state of Ohio do not document that data. And when they do document the data, they say that less than 1%, like less than, they don't give a specific number. So it's really hard to measure it when we don't even have a number listed in many of the reports. And so that makes it super, super hard, super challenging to do that part. And then in looking at many of the design disciplines, when we go deeply into the schools, the largest minority that is there are Asians. And so Black and Latinos still remain underrepresented. So being able to do something for these particular two underrepresented communities is very near and dear to us at Design Diversity.
Yeah, and to respond, kind of going back in time to Design Diversity's start in 2013, we had that conversation about, well, what does diversity mean? How are we defining it? And we made the decision at that time to define the professions as presented, and also to focus on diversity of racial diversity, specifically African American and Latino Hispanic diversity, recognizing that that's not the extent of all of the groups that should be represented in the design professions, but for us to start somewhere based on the communities that we were a part of, and to define the scope of our work. That's where we landed, and we think that there is possibility of expanding beyond that if there's the need or the interest in that. But again, for the sake of clarity, again, diversity is one of those words that can mean a lot of things. Sometimes to the point of difficulty of kind of knowing what we're talking about when we use the word. So we try to be clear in how we define diversity.
Okay, thank you. Next question. This question is related to professional association data sets that you gathered. Have you looked at getting data from educational institutions that provide the professional education? And if you haven't, how come?
Yes. No, we have. However, much of that data is a huge undertaking for universities and schools to release it, because a lot of that information is private, right? Like particularly for our private institutions, they're not obligated to share that content. They're not mandated by any means. And so a lot of the data that we did pull was from the Ohio Department of Education, because the schools in our group 1 in section A specifically, they have to report that information to for a lot of the students, for funding purposes, for academic purposes, for curriculum, and so forth. Can you repeat the second part of the question? Because I want to make sure I got that one.
No, that
was
it. Got it.
Perfect.
Yeah, that was it. So someone else asked the same thing about universities and academic offices. What about alumni associations? Have you reached out to any alumni associations? Perhaps they don't have such stringent rules about releasing that type of data.
Yes, definitely. That was the good thing about taking a peek into group 2, because many of the associations, particularly the one at Ohio State University, as well as University of Cincinnati, they are very, very large and very, very big. And so they do a lot more public facing. And so it's a little bit easier to get that information. But again, getting the demographic data as far as these two underserved communities is challenging. So if there's someone out there who has the specific number produced in the report, we're definitely interested in seeing that information.
Okay, great. Next question. How are you making sure to avoid bias in your data methodology?
Mm-hmm. Oh, no, that's an excellent question. Well, Well, first of all, a piece of the research work that we are using the framework for the design journey thesis, I actually wrote that. And so being part of that initial research, looking at bias, were things like, hey, have we called all the schools? Did we ask different people about these same types of questions? Being very specific in our interviewing process, that we did not change things up along the way. Also being very specific as far as, hey, if we received information from one school, making sure that we also look to see if that information was available or not available at a school, so that we didn't kind of like exclude anybody. And then I think that being able to, having done research projects in the past, avoiding the bias pieces was something that I looked heavily at.
Okay, thank you. Interesting question. Have you considered how these findings might affect the public sector in terms of policy making?
Absolutely. One of the bigger sections, we talked about this a little bit in next steps under the youth programs. We found so many youth programs. I mean, a huge amount, but many of them are like grassroots things, right? They're things that are starting in people's communities or local schools. They may not have websites up yet. They may not have received any type of like national funding. And one of the things that we have contemplated here is like, if we were able to share with the public all of these youth organizations, even if they weren't huge ones, right? 5 or 10 people here, 2 people at this one agency doing some things. We were able to share out all that information. Would it increase the numbers to bring more visibility to this particular topic for the workforce? So yes, we have considered that. We're still debating that. We're still debating, like, what do we do with all of these youth programs that we found? That's the reason that they're kind of divided in those 4 sections. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of that will determine on, future funding, website constraints, usability, all of those types of things.
Yeah, but I think that the question about future responses or potential response mm-hmm. to the tool, it's a next step in a lot of ways for maybe our organization or the Design Diversity Initiative, but we hope to hear from others in that regards. It's a first step, as we see it, to provide the data in a comparative fashion. Again, organizations and professional groups are really stepping up, particularly in recent years, to take on this challenge and the need to address the lack of diversity. So our intention to kind of share the work and the data from the different disciplines in one place will hopefully inspire those kinds of actions that are necessary, be it policy at different levels or local activities, starting local programs or local activities or just collaboration across the different disciplines, so that maybe the issue isn't addressed simply within a single discipline, but we may find alliances across multiple disciplines. And interestingly, that's something that Jacinda's research before the index identified, namely the need to recruit within certain disciplines from adjacent disciplines. There may be individuals that found graphic design to be an opportunity because they never met an architect before, and that could be an audience to attract to pursue, becoming a licensed architect, for example, yeah. Or vice versa, right? There's these hybrid practices that result in, a practice that's hard to distinguish as either architecture or graphic design, but it's actually both, and those may be more appealing. Or even design disciplines that we haven't mentioned yet, like fashion, like various types of computer coding, digital media. Yeah, there's a lot of room for kind of expansion, and then hearing from those communities on what are the ways that this data can be useful to you. Yeah.
Great. Now, understanding that a lot of this, any future work that you do depends on funding. But after this project is hopefully completed and the findings are released, are there any possible plans to kind of touch back again to see if any progress has been made in diversifying some of these fields after this has been released?
Yeah, absolutely. That's really a goal from the very beginning, not only to create one snapshot, but to create a platform that is relatively easy to update. So, tracking the data sources and then the data visualization techniques are an important part of the work. Like Jacinda mentioned, identifying those data streams that we feel, well, for one, are accessible and publishable, that we can present publicly without a problem, and data sources that we believe will be relatively stable into the future, that may be updated over time. That's definitely a central goal of the project. So like you said, yes, funding is an important part of that. But we're really doing our best to create a platform now that can be easily updated in the future, and building those relationships with organizations that are aware of the tool, and then we can create a relatively simple
updating process.
Yeah, exactly.
It'll really be, it's interesting that you asked that question, because as we've moved throughout each step of this project, that's always been one of the first questions that we've asked. Hey, if we had to do this next year, is this a practice that we would keep, or is this a practice that we wouldn't? So being able to heavily keep up with the documents that we have received, like those links, making sure that they're updated regularly is a huge component.
Great. Okay, well, I think we're going to wrap up here. The questions are kind of trailing off now. So folks, if you have any other further questions that you think of, go ahead and just reach out to our speakers directly. And don't forget to head over to their website. And again, this session has been recorded, and it will be posted to our YouTube channel. We'll have a PDF also available up on our webcast webpage. Just head over to ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. So thank you both for joining us today. And everyone, we will talk next time. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.